Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of CloudBites Conversations, where today we have a member of our community who I'm really pleased to have on it because I've been on his podcast, so it's always nice to kind of switch the roles around and interview someone who's or talk to someone who's been grilling you the other way around, and B, because they've got a really kind of, I think, interesting, unique role in the ecosystem, but also an interesting, unique view about that role as well. So, really pleased to have Jack McCurdy here today with us. Welcome to
Hey,
the
Paul,
podcast.
how's it going?
No, thank you for coming along. So, Jack, for those who aren't familiar with you, can you just give us a little bit of a background as to who you are, where you come from? Do you like long walks on the beach? All those sorts of normal questions.
Absolutely. First of all, I do enjoy long walks, but they tend to be on golf courses rather than beaches. So
Okay.
when I'm not doing Salesforce things, the golf course is usually where you will find me. Um, yeah, pleasure to be here, Paul, and thank you for having me on. And hopefully you didn't feel like it was a grilling on the podcast that I
No,
did.
definitely not a
We had a
grilling.
really good
No,
conversation.
always a
Um,
very, very nice conversation. I'm jesting. It was definitely not a grilling. I don't think I've been on one yet where that happens, thankfully.
Yeah, so Jack McCurdy, I am a DevOps advocate for a company called Gearset, who hopefully a lot of people are familiar with in the Salesforce ecosystem. We're a DevOps platform, Salesforce ISV, helping customers of all shapes and sizes accelerate their releases and build better development best practices within their Salesforce setup. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for 6 years, just over 6 years, and the totality of my time in the ecosystem has been with Gearset. So 6 years feels like a long time to me. I recognize that still quite junior in the ecosystem compared to a lot of the folks that I interact with and speak with, but I also find it interesting being in the community and still bumping into people that have only 2 or 3 or 1 year of experience in the ecosystem. So by no means an old hat, but definitely not a newbie either. So
No, I think I had this conversation a while ago with my wife. In fact, so my wife is a solution architect and has been doing Salesforce now for well over a decade. But when she started doing Salesforce, I'd been doing it for sort of 4, 5, 6 years, something like that. And this was when kind of the community was very small, a long time ago when it was a lot smaller. And yeah, like a couple of years back, I said to her, "Oh," and I was talking to her about it, and she was telling me how long she'd been doing Salesforce. Like, that's a really long time. And she's like, "Yeah, I know. I've been doing this a long time." I'm like, "Yeah." And it's just mentally through your own time dilation, if you know what I mean. It feels like, oh well, she's still only just no, she's been doing it for a decade. She's a very experienced person. It's just that because I remember her not doing it, you kind of have that. So I think that there's I think there's a lot of people that feel like they've been around the ecosystem for a long time because the ecosystem's not that old. Like, I've been around for 15 years. If I was in like sort of any other ecosystem, I'd still be like, a junior. Just you've been doing C++ for 15 years. Oh, well, you'll get to be a mid-level developer at some point soon. Yeah, it's
you're nearly there. You're
yeah,
nearly
there are
there.
SAP implementations that have been going on longer than my career in Salesforce. I can tell you. So it's um, so you mentioned, you mentioned you obviously your career in the ecosystem has been at Gearset, and cards on the table. I'm a Gearset user, big Gearset fan. Have been using Gearset for a long time, and happily can proclaim that I ran the developer group where Kevin gave the first public Gearset demo many many years ago.
Oh
Uh,
wow,
yeah,
I
so
didn't know that. That's a good fact.
there you go. Yeah, fun little tidbit is Kevin came to Leeds and showed us Gearset, which was still just like a very very small startup then, and then made great friends with everyone by buying a large round of beers for a couple of hours. So
Yeah, it sounds like Kevin.
yeah, no, it was good fun. And Kevin's the CEO of Gearset, and a wonderful person. If you get to be, I don't you don't see him around and about as often anymore. He kind of is busy running the company now, but he's
Yeah,
always great to hang out with whenever he's about. So.
yeah. No, Kevin's great, and I think running a company of now 360, 370 people has very different demands from back when the original 7, one of which Kevin was started. But he does love everything that he started with the community and getting out there and going up to leads, presenting at user groups. You know, a lot of the things that we do as a company started way back then with Kevin, Matt, and the team shepherding and taking those ideas forward and getting involved in those things, which is why I think Gearset does still have a significant presence in the community. Myself, obviously, being one of the main contributors to that now. But yeah, no, Kevin and the leadership team have done a great job from those early days to where we are now. And dare I say, he would love to be out and about there more. If he had the time to, if he could clone himself, I guess, then you'd see a lot more of him, and he'd be buying many, many more pints for the Salesforce community if he was able to.
I'm going to share one brief little additional nice story about Kevin. So a couple of years ago, when the role I was at Cloud Galacticos, when Cloud Galacticos was kind of winding up and wrapping up, and I was just starting my own new venture, out of the blue, I got a message from Kevin just saying, "Hey, seeing that Cloud Galacticos is winding up, hope everything's okay. Hope you're all right. Let's catch up for half an hour." And so, yeah, conveniently, when I was switching roles, it was in the middle of my honeymoon, so that was perfect timing. But I came back, and Kevin had proactively reached out just to kind of have a half-hour coffee and a chat, just to check how things were going, and offer support and help if I needed it and things like that, which was just wonderful kind of thing. So it's a little personal story just to share, though, to talk about how Gearset definitely, I think, has that kind of leadership that have the right intentions throughout as well. So I don't think anyone else has ever heard that story. So there you go. There's an exclusive for you, Jack, that you can share around the. Cool.
I've not heard that story before, but it's also entirely not surprising. Kevin's a good human, and a lot of the good things that we do at Gearset is down to the initial leadership that the company started with and has retained. So yeah, hats off to Kevin if you happen to be listening to this.
Yes,
hopefully not embarrassing you or making you blush too much.
Yeah, we'll tag him on here and make sure he does. So your first foray into the ecosystem was with Gearset, and you started off as an account executive, and then you moved up, I think, to an enterprise account executive. So what was it like coming into the Salesforce space? Had you used Salesforce before anywhere? Were you familiar with the idea, or were you one of the kind of people outside of the cult that had never even heard of it and didn't know what it was? It's what was it like getting severed and coming into Salesforce as a space?
Yeah, it's interesting to reflect on. So prior to Gearset, I worked for a recruitment company, a big multinational recruitment company, and I remember about a year or so, maybe 6 months before I left, one of our directors in our office was talking about we had our own custom CRM, which was not good.
Which was a homegrown custom CRM. That's all we need to know.
Yeah, it was a custom CRM, and we didn't. A lot of people didn't enjoy using it and what have you. And there was talk from this director of getting Salesforce, and Salesforce. That was the first time I'd ever heard the word Salesforce or anything along those lines. But it was lauded as this magical thing that was going to help solve some of the challenges that we had in the business. I didn't know what those challenges were. I stepped into the Salesforce ecosystem, and a year down the line was just like, oh, were they going to replace our CRM that we had with Salesforce? And I reflect on it now, the way that the director was talking, it sounded like they were getting Salesforce probably to do some Marketing Cloud or Pardot style stuff. Is what my hunch is like after the fact. But yeah, the first exposure that I had to Salesforce is that it was lauded as this magical thing that was going to come in and solve a bunch of our business problems prior to being in recruitment. The pathway for me into the ecosystem is being a recruiter, and Gearset being the size of the company that it was back in 2019 that I joined. Towards the end of 2018, I had a conversation with an ex-colleague of mine that I was in recruitment with. He transitioned to be a contract recruiter for Gearset. So Gearset was about 20 people at the time that he joined and helped them with their talent acquisition. He was moving on to go and be a pilot, and Kevin and Matt said to him, Matt Dickens, our other co-founder, said to him, "Is there anyone that you'd recommend? We feel like we need somebody to come and do recruitment full time for us." He recommended me, had initial conversations with Luke Drury, our head of engineering at the time, and Kevin. Met them in a pub in Cambridge, and had a conversation about what that would look like. Went through the whole interview process and had some stiff competition and got beaten out by that competition. So a colleague of mine, Sarah Turkentine, who still works for Gearset, was better suited to the role, had more employer branding experience and some of the sides of internal recruitment that are also important when you're looking at recruiting for a business, rather than being an agency recruiter where you work with lots of different businesses and are more focused on your network and the ecosystem that you work in. So they gave the job to Sarah for that recruitment role. Kevin turned around to me at that time and said, "Hey, we're giving the role to somebody else. However, we've really enjoyed talking to you and the way that you approach things. How would you feel about coming and doing sales for Gearset instead of recruitment?" And through that interview process, I was just like, yes, I want to work at this place. This team seems great. Everybody that I've worked with and talked to throughout this process seems great. Wasn't married to recruitment or continuing down that path. So I was just like, yeah, I want to do sales. So I probably, even still, probably have done the most interviews of any person that's ever interviewed at Gearset, including our senior leadership, because I went through the whole interview process for that, and then a second interview process for the sales role. But that was how I got hired, and coming into the Salesforce ecosystem was really down to kind of interesting and meaningful that we brought up Kevin already in this podcast. But if it wasn't for Kevin, then I wouldn't have got my start and wouldn't have started to find out all the amazing things about this community, about Salesforce and the nuances. And that was back in 2019. Even in the last 6 years, the platform has grown and changed significantly. The ecosystem has grown and changed significantly, even in the 6 years that I've been doing this. So that was my first exposure to Salesforce, and to quickly learn that Salesforce wasn't going to be this bad magic bullet for that old recruitment company that I used to work for was quite eye-opening.
It's it's often sold as a magic bullet, and it can do some very magical things when it's worked on. But to say on day one it's a magic bullet is unfortunately not there. So that's really interesting. So, because one of the things that I love talking about on this podcast is people's backgrounds, and so we'll jump in a minute into kind of, I suppose, the sales role and how that made you decide to go into evangelism. But just to kind of take a step back, I was doing the kind of normal nosing around that you do on LinkedIn when you're preparing for these things, and checking to see what skeletons you had hidden away there, secret memberships, and all my life he was a Dynamics developer, something like that, member of the HubSpot fan club or whatever it might be. But one of the things that I noticed was obviously your recruiter role, which I think's really interesting, because there are certain jobs, and sales also falls into this. And I was having this conversation, in fact, with my dad the other week when he was here. Certain jobs, I think, really help you get good at working with people. And I think sales is one of them, recruitment's one of them, bar work is a fantastic one, because I think there's just certain jobs where, but particularly sales and recruitment, I think they both get you very good at building rapport and talking to people and understanding the problem quickly, but also dealing with rejection. Because I can imagine, like, there was a period I was joking with my wife earlier on today, but there was a period in the Salesforce space where I felt like I was getting a job kind of pushed at me every other day. Just a recruiter reaching out, and you kind of saying, "Listen, I'm not interested." And so do you think that kind of the way in which you've had roles like recruitment, like sales, has made you view how you interact with people, and kind of see, to kind of dive into the DevOps side a little bit before we kind of loop back, has it changed the way you see these problems and kind of think about how they can be solved, I suppose, or even how you communicate them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and unequivocally, yes. So if we look at the tapestry of my career prior to joining the Salesforce ecosystem, yes, recruitment was the thing that I did prior to Gearset. Prior to that recruitment role that I had, I worked for one of the watch companies here in the UK and did customer service for them before doing a watch quality job, and
Yeah.
that was out and about, like going and sampling these pumping stations, but I was also responsible for a lot of like the reporting and the data and that side of the business as well. And even prior to that, I was in sales in a retail shop, so clothing brand here called Superdry, which to this end, anybody who asks me, I still say that retail is one of my favorite jobs that I've ever had, and for a number of reasons. But the reason that I love that retail job was the interaction with people and the feeling that you got when somebody came into the store, you were talking to them, they were buying something nice for themselves. Usually, Superdry back then when I worked for them was a fairly middle to upper market kind of brand.
Yeah.
If young kids were coming in there, they were coming in to buy something special. A gentleman might come in to buy one of our nice leather jackets that we did. A lot of folks came in there for a very like specific piece, and helping guide them through the what do you like, what do you not like, what are you going to use this jacket for, what have you got going on this weekend or what have you. And a lot of the times people would be like, I'm coming in to buy a shirt, like I've got a dinner for something and I want to have something nice to wear, treating myself because I'm spending my birthday money that I got, which was a common thing with a bunch of teenagers. But going in and understanding them and asking them questions and guiding them through the retail experience and giving them experience when they stepped into the store, and seeing their happiness and their joy at the checkout till when they're just like seeing them feel good. They tried stuff on, you work with them through that process, and seeing how what you're doing and the service that you provide creates a good experience for them as a human, I think is something that's really been foundational to how I approach everything. And that's then transitioned into the customer service role that I did for the water company, and then absolutely into the recruitment side of things. The problems that I think we all solve on a daily basis at the end of the day in the Salesforce ecosystem, everything that we're trying to solve is ultimately a people solution. And that is very much the approach that I take. So I kind of use those experiences that I've taken from that career tapestry prior to Gearset and prior to Salesforce to really stay grounded in, okay, if a Salesforce admin developer architect is building a solution, ultimately is going to help a human on the other side of it. And same goes for when you're helping customers align their processes and their people to adopting a DevOps way of working and DevOps workflows, and that using that as the way to manage a Salesforce implementation and ongoing success of a project. Ultimately, doing that will impact the Salesforce admins, developers, and architects that are responsible for building the platform. It ultimately affects how they feel about their roles and the human gratification that they have, because they're not getting frustrated using change sets, or they're not having so many issues in collaboration and getting bogged down in the minutiae of bad processes and feeling all those feelings of frustration, your resentment, and staying up till 2 a.m. Common stories are that people can let's talk about the pub again, can go to the pub on a Friday night because they're not wrestling with a release. They can go and have dinner with their family. They can switch off at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or whatever your hybrid work schedule is these days. Enabling those human experiences or creating better human experiences is ultimately at the core of what anybody does in any business. And I think my career to this point has really helped keep me grounded in what we do actually affects people, and that is the thing that we're looking after here at the core of everything that we do in the Salesforce ecosystem. So yeah, all of those experiences combined are really have been really useful for me transitioning into sales and selling a technical solution to what is ultimately a people problem.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the things you kind of hit on there that is one of my kind of bugbears, and that many people have heard me get on a small soapbox about before, is remembering that there's a human using things at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Just on a very sort of boring technical aside, one of the things that irritates the bejesus out of me is when people sort of say, "Well, you need to write your code in this way to do these things." They're like, "Well, what's the benefit of that?" It's like, "Well, it's better for you. It looks neater for you." I'm like, "But I had one group I worked with once where sort of this very smart guy knew exactly what he was doing, was adamant that kind of he had to have this code written in this way." I was like, "Okay, your code looks beautiful, but it takes 8 seconds to run through everything and do it. My sort of trimmed down, yes, less beautiful, less perfect practice version does it in 2 seconds. Which do you think the end user is going to be happy with? Like the 2 seconds or the eight?" Like, you've got to, if you sat there and pressed a button 10,000 times a day and it took 8 seconds every time, you would start screaming. There's no two ways about it. And I think that there's just in general, there can often be that forgotten piece of the human at the end of it. Like, who's the person this is impacting? What are they doing in their day to day life? Because a lot of people I don't think use their own solutions or tools that they build. Which is where I suppose something nice about somewhere like Gearset is you will be using your own, eating your own dog food, I suppose is the phrase.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And and to that point in that story that you tell, like being in this space now, like I understand architectural like considerations, and clean code and clean Apex is super important. There has to be, I think we need to be more mindful of the trade-offs, and decisions architecturally are all well and good. However, if a lot of people forget that human lens sometimes, what is the best experience for the user? One of the roles that I have a perception of, because I'm hearing it talked about more, is like UX is becoming like a bigger and bigger thing in the Salesforce ecosystem now, and good. UX is one of the core reasons why Gearset has grown to be the platform that it is. It's always been grounded in great user design and user experience, which is why I think a lot of folks like our product, and a lot of people find a lot of value from it because they're able to navigate it in a way that makes sense. Yes, it's outside of the Salesforce platform because it's an API based tool. However, the UI that we give people to actually do the job and execute the job that they are tasked with when it comes to doing anything on the Gearset platform, they have a better user experience because that's always been at the heart of what we do. So yeah, user and human experiences are totally at the forefront of everything that I think about. It was when I was doing sales, but especially now more so in the shape of the world that we're in now, whether it be AI, or now people are really realizing and understanding the importance of DevOps and what it can do for organizations.
So one of the things as well that I noticed in kind of your background, because I think the AI and other things are really, really interesting. I want to dive into them in a little bit, but just to finish wrapping up on your kind of career background, the other thing I saw that really piqued my interest, if I'm honest, and not to say that a recruitment role and a compliance role at Waterboards didn't excite me, but the one that really did was the you used to be a reviewer for Take One, so you wrote a lot of reviews for Take One, which is so. Tell us a little bit about that, and because from what I understand, it was sort of like I'm going to say a background part-time role sort of thing, doing it almost voluntarily maybe. But tell us a little bit about that, but also kind of how that's fed in, if you think if you think it has anyway. Because one of the when we had Peter on here, Peter Chittum, one of the things he was talking about is his major at university at college was theatre. Now, I can't imagine very many things less applicable day to day to writing code than theatre. But as he said, it's all about, it was talking about performance and communication and how you work as a team on a thing. And so there's a lot of parallels over that. So do you think that evidently writing reviews is obviously going to be taking some ideas, analyzing some things, and communicating the ideas back. Have you found that that has impacted your day work as well? If not only in the production of any of the videos you do for DevOps diaries and other things, making your own splashes that you want to be reviewed elsewhere.
Yeah, it's. I'm glad you picked up on that. Actually, I think in addition to that, there's kind of two things outside of like my traditional career that I think have really kind of shaped my experience and led me to the point that I am now. One of them is writing. So Take One is a independent magazine here in Cambridge, attached and associated with Picture House Cinemas. And back when I was in sixth form, and sixth form is junior, senior year of high school for any of the American listeners. When I was in my senior year of effectively high school, I was asked by I studied film and media and psychology in my later years of school. I was asked by my film teacher or lecturer, there's this magazine, Cambridge has a film festival every year. They're looking for student reviewers to support their festival coverage, and I'd like to put you forward as one of the students that we have here to go and review some films, go watch some films, review them for their magazine. And I was like, sure. And I've always enjoyed writing. It's one of the things that I was good at in school. People in school, when they had to write an essay for like English or whatever subject it was, a lot of people wanted to throw their books out the window. But that generally wasn't me. I've always quite enjoyed writing. And I said, yes, let's go and do that. And having that experience of being able to go to that film festival for the first time and write something constructive in a completely different way that I'd not really thought about before, really accelerated my skills and development as a writer. And one of the first reviews that I did as part of that film festival was for the film Drive, so Ryan Gosling's like breakout film in 2012. And they published it in the physical copy of the magazine that year, and it's hosted online, and built a good relationship with the editors of that magazine, and carried on writing for them for a few years after that, contributing to the physical and digital media on their website. And I've recognized now that I write a lot of content now for Gearset, a lot of it for my own LinkedIn articles or publications like DevOps.com, DevOps Digest, and all of these things. And those small experiences being grounded, like I love film, like I absolutely love film. I will watch a lot of films, and it's actually really hard for me to switch off my film analyzer brain now. So I can't watch things without analyzing everything from like the score to the cinematography to the acting, you name it. Like it's really hard for me just to switch off. And that's how I know if I've watched a really good film, is that part of my brain is switched off and I'm completely immersed in the story. So those experiences and that chance to work with editors has really kind of shaped how I think about writing now. If you read any of my pieces on LinkedIn, especially, or I have a blog now that I write completely for my own personal interest and enjoyment about Texas Longhorns football, American college football team. Though the just pure enjoyment that I get out of writing is something that I'm very grateful that I'm able to have as a part of my job. And those kind of experiences and working with editors in those early days, 18 years old, and getting guidance from people in those roles has made me receptive to, or in those early days made me receptive to feedback and constructive criticism, which is hugely important if we tie it back into how we operate as humans within teams generally. Having those kind of formative experiences of receiving feedback and acting on feedback and looking for areas of improvement and being told areas of improvement is really important and really conducive, especially as I think one of the biggest workplace problems that a lot of folks have is they don't have a great feedback culture, or they don't have a good constructive feedback culture, which I think is probably the bigger problem. They're happy to take the praise, but the second you're either slightly analytical or critical of somebody's work, then that's when things start to fall down. So those experiences are something that I use when I'm talking to teams about their feedback cultures or communication generally is just like, okay, this is how you frame it in this way. And feedback's a kind of two-way street. As a person that is giving feedback, you have to be constructive and thoughtful in the way that you deliver that feedback. But as a person, you also have to be receptive to that feedback and understand it's very hard not to take constructive criticism personally. You really do have to abstract the personal out of constructive feedback, and it's you and the person versus the problem or the issue and the problem that you're trying to solve together. It's not you versus each other when in a feedback setting. So that's what I think is probably the most interesting thing that I took from that, and how I kind of apply those things that I learned and I thought in different ways across businesses when I'm talking to them. And I think those experiences, when it's interesting to sit here and reflect on it all, because you don't really think about it at the time, but then you sit and reflect and you go, oh, maybe that is why it's important, and why I have a decent perspective on it. So that's the biggest thing that I think writing has done for me, and having that experience, outside of a traditional work environment, if you like. There was a time that I wanted to go and write for like Empire magazine and things like that, and do that as like a full-time hobby. But I didn't keep my foot on the gas, and life happens, and you go, how do I make money more quickly, more easily than bashing my head over a wall, writing thousands of articles to maybe get a payday. So maybe I took a bit of an easier way out, but it's something that I do for enjoyment now through the Hooked blog that I have, and maintaining that as a passion project is enjoyable for me, and on my own terms. So
that's cool. That's really interesting. I think one of the things you just kind of hit on there as well about that, taking feedback and working with that, I think is a really important thing to learn as early as possible. And one of the interesting things, again, to kind of bring up Peter Chittum, one of the interesting things he and I were chatting about, not even on an episode, but I think just in our regular kind of chewing the fat together, was about that, and kind of the conversation around. Someone had asked me for some feedback on something. It was a session they were submitting somewhere. I gave the feedback, and they didn't. They weren't overly receptive and didn't like the feedback. The feedback I gave was, you've got the core of a great idea here. Like, you need to just you know what it's like when you submit sessions to a Dreamforce or a Dreamolay or London Schooling, wherever. You got to sell the sizzle, not the steak. You know what I mean? It's you need a catchy title, and it's about making it right for that audience. And so we had this conversation, and I said, look, you're 80% of the way there. If you just tweak these bits and add this into it. And the feedback was kind of not well received. It was not taken in kind of the view that it was. And definitely part of that I reflected was, did I give the feedback in the appropriate way, which I could have maybe sat with the person rather than responding to them via message or whatever, which is what they asked for. But one of the interesting things Peter and I were talking about is he said, I think that one of the things that is often a missing step is that when you're sat with someone and there is this feedback exchange, is sitting down and saying to them, great, Jack, I would like some feedback on this work I've done. The kind of feedback I'm asking for is around these things. Could you give me feedback around those things, or what you think about them, and how I can best improve these aspects? And really kind of level setting that part, because I think that there's one of the difficult things is often people can feel attacked, and it's that unfair thing on both the giver and the receiver. Those asking for feedback, it's unfair on the person you're asking if you don't give some level of indication as to what you're expecting, what areas you want. Because if I said to you, Jack, could you watch this episode of the podcast or whatever, and can you give me some feedback? You and I know each other well enough that I would assume you guessed that I'm asking for, like, are you going, oh, well, you could have paused a bit more here, or watch out for this, maybe include a transition. You're not going to sit there and go, well, listen, Paul, don't like your haircut for a start. The color blue you've got in the background, that really needs switching. You know what I mean? Like, it's figuring that out. And I think it was just a really interesting thing that he mentioned around that. One of the missing steps he finds is often just that level setting and expectation when it comes to feedback, because unsolicited feedback, I think, is often the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does make sense. I think one of the things that we do really well here at Gearset as a company, and I was doing I do a lot of the interviews even still. The recruitment side of me hasn't left me. I do a lot of the interviews for prospective employees for Gearset in the second stage of our interview process, which is our values-based interview, and a lot of the questions that we get asked from candidates is, what's one of the best things about working at Gearset? And routinely, one of the answers that I give, and the answer is given by my co-interview or whoever it happens to be, is the feedback culture that we have at Gearset is really healthy. Number one, there's a lot of praise when people are doing great work, and that happens unilaterally. I can't say that. Unilaterally across the business, whether it's praise. We bring Kevin up again. Kevin is one of these people in anything that he's involved in. If people are doing great work, we'll give praise for, and that is universal across all of the teams. Lots of praise for good work. The other thing is that the feedback culture is so embedded into what we do at Gearset, is when we do have constructive feedback for folks, that we are all happy to give constructive feedback and receive constructive feedback in whatever manner that it comes. It's a routine part of people's work. As a software engineer, I can see, a common place for feedback on the work that you do is obviously in your peer review, pull requests and what have you. Like, this could be tidied up. This doesn't work as cleanly as we meant it. I've got another great story about Kevin about that actually in just a second. But that culture, if it's there, and like I guess the question that if you're listening to this podcast is just like, how do you get there, is be open with it. We use Slack as our primary method of communication across the business here. We have 3 offices, ton of remote workers, fully remote workers, a lot of hybrid workers. So Slack is where work gets done at Gearset. People are not scared to post publicly pieces of work that they have done, whether that's marketing copy, whether it's emails that they're planning on sending to a customer, whether it's anything along those lines. People are happy to post publicly and say and tag specific people that they're looking for the feedback from. But anybody can chime in on that and say this looks great, or that's really good, but this might need a tweak here. What's the objective or the result that you're actually looking for here? Okay, that's what you're looking for. This is how you might tweak it to achieve that result slightly better. And again, what I said earlier about it's you and a person against a problem rather than you versus somebody else about how you would both do some things, is kind of the shift in mindset. And the more open you are to, as a business, saying, or even, and change starts with you, right? So if you don't necessarily have a great feedback culture in the organization that you work for right now, just starting and saying, hey, can people give me feedback on this, constructive or otherwise, about what I've done, and just starting that conversation and making it okay for people to engage in those kind of sessions, you'll start to see small incremental change. It's one of those cliche things, if you be the change you want to see in the world, or be the change that you want to see in your organization, that's really important to moving forward. So as well as, like Peter and you were having that conversation about setting expectations, saying, hey, I'd like some feedback. I'm not sure that this part of my code works particularly well, or I'm not sure that this part of the flow is particularly helpful, or might get stuck in a loop, or whatever it is. Just being open to receiving some feedback and starting to engage in that culture and actually have a conversation about it, rather than just going, I'll just do it until I'm told off, or something goes wrong, is the way that people are going to change. Coming back to the Kevin story that I just mentioned, the feedback culture at Gearset is so good that once we had, so Kevin's a software engineer at heart and by trade, he built a lot of the original core platform of Gearset, and we had an intern leave a comment on a pull request that Kevin had done a couple of years ago, and the intern said, not sure that this makes sense, or something along those lines. Maybe you could tweak it like this. And an intern gave that feedback to the CEO, who was a software engineer with 25 years experience. That's kind of the culture that we have here at Gearset. And if you ask me how to replicate it in an organization that doesn't have a great culture right now, or that doesn't exist, you've got to start with the small wins and just be somebody that encourages it. Also start by lifting people up and congratulating good work, but then also say, hey, I want some constructive criticism on what we've got here, or constructive feedback on this piece of work. What do people think? And see how many people follow in your footsteps. One of the interesting things that I've seen and observed in lots of teams is the mimicking of behavior in groups. And I think you see this across nature, and you see this across social settings. People start to mimic the behaviors that they see from other people naturally. It's one of those human things that people just do. Your friendship group, somebody might start wearing Adidas trainers and they used to be Nikes. See how many people then buy Adidas trainers once you start doing it, right? And it's the same thing in an organization. When you start to display the behaviors and the culture that you want to see in an organization, it will start to get mirrored back. And the longer time progresses, the more consistent you are with those styles of behavior, then that will come back and come around to the way that you envisage. But it doesn't happen overnight. You can't change a culture just by snapping your fingers. You can't have a consultant come in, or me come in and say, do this and you'll be fine, and it will change instantly overnight. That's not the way these things work.
No, and I think, all those things you just said there are really, really good points, and very, very true. And yeah, I like the story about Kevin as well, kind of having his pull request reviewed. One of the things I think's just as an interesting aside on that, which it'd be good as well to kind of get your views on, is, and I think that kind of the story you've said about with Kevin there as well that shows it is, I think there's a big part of that kind of cultural shift as well that's beholden upon those more senior. Because one of the things that I think often happens with feedback is it ends up being hierarchical by kind of default. So it's like, well, I'll ask my boss for feedback because my boss is the person, typically, again, in a lot of organizations, my boss is the person that can, if I show my boss I'm doing good work, if they look at it and go, yes, that's a really good presentation, yeah, it's that visibility of, look at all the good work I'm doing, so that you're possibly likely to get better results, better, maybe a promotion, all these other things. Whereas I think one of the things that is really kind of incumbent is actually to have the feedback be you almost requesting it downwards, if that makes sense. So what I mean is, like, if you are the lead developer on a project, there was a couple of projects I've worked on where I was, the TA and was writing code, and I'd send my pull request to be reviewed by, newer team members, junior team members. You might think it'd be like, all right, I'll send it to the other TA to review, or I'll just merge it anyway because I'm me, I can do what I want. Who's going to tell me off? But I think it's really, really important to do that because I think it gets other people exposed to stuff because normally if I'm getting involved in something, it's a slightly more thorny problem, or it's something that needs has had a certain amount of separate steps thinking through, or it's difficult or sensitive or something like that. So it's great to expose more junior people to that, rather than just be like, hey, here's another test class for you to review, or like a button change or something stupid. But I think it's incumbent upon people in more senior positions to ask for that feedback from more junior people, so that it feels like it's not a hierarchical thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. I think that's one of the things. One of the things that leadership here does do well. It's, I think, generally in organizations, and you see this whatever sector that you're in is, the further you move up the ladder, like it's very easy to get an inflated sense of self-worth and importance the more you move up that ladder. But ultimately, if you don't remember what's like, send the elevator back down, send the experiences back down, and you'll have a better, healthier culture. Because ultimately, if you're in senior positions, you're responsible for the overall success of whole teams, and sometimes not just the thing that you're doing, and everybody that is part of that team is going to contribute to the overall success and actually how good you look. If you're not helping and encouraging those behaviors in that environment, then you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you are in those senior leadership roles. So I totally agree with you in regards to sending that feedback back down. And ultimately, if we look at like the language of what we do, like, we call them peer reviews. We don't call them my level reviews. We call them peer reviews, and that's anybody like within your team. So yeah, I think that's just an interesting nuance when we think about these things, and the dichotomy between what actually happens and what the language of the thing that we're doing actually intends.
Oh, I mean, we could go off on a real tangent here into like why it is that this entire peer feedback and getting people to critique your work is half the reason that we have so many things wrong with kind of tech billionaires at the moment. Where I definitely, because I can definitely see there'll be certain people in big tech organizations that just surround. When you're a billionaire, you're just surrounded by yes men that
Mhm.
you won't be getting that feedback you need in some places. So, but avoiding going into too deep a social topic like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that's a separate politics podcast that Jack and I are going to be putting together. Putting the world to right with Paul and Jack. Is kind of the before we start diving into, and we kind of touched on a lot of kind of the cultural aspects and the feedback aspects of that. The final kind of thing I just want to ask on the kind of career steps thing was the switch from sales to evangelism. And so
Yeah.
before we kind of dive even further into kind of I suppose how cultural change is important to kind of DevOps processes and the impacts of some of the changing world around it now, is just what made you make that shift from sales to doing evangelism? Because it's, I mean, I've seen, obviously we've had a lot of people here move from marketing roles to evangelism. So the likes that we had Christy Fedora on last week's episode, and Christy's done a load of marketing roles and then kind of moved across into the evangelism side of things. What made you move from sales to evangelism?
Yeah. So I did sales for 3 years for Gearset. So about half of my total Gearset career, as of today, was in sales, and then half is in evangelism. The interesting thing about being in sales at Gearset, so we were a 30-person company when I joined, and I think I mentioned at the start of the podcast, we're 370 now. So that's the company has changed massively. But as a result, when sales back then, we were sales, solution engineering, customer success, like you kind of name it, we kind of did it, classic startup kind of vibe. As a result of that, the salespeople had a lot of deeply technical knowledge. Like, we were always very technical sales team, and to some extent still are now, even though we're supported by solutions engineers, sales engineers. We had a lot of the demo experience. We had a lot of the technical understanding, and were able to communicate, things like admins getting on board with Git. Why should they use version control and things like that? Those are types of topics that we speak to teams about, and are quite well versed in talking about. The marketing team was 2 people back when I started at Gearset, and when we started wanting to do things like webinars, the first people that were actually able to run some of these webinars and do some of these webinars, and were naturally more inclined to talking publicly about these things, were the salespeople. So we got asked, hey, would you be happy to run this Git for Admins webinar, or talk about DevOps on one of the early summits that we did? And I was one of the people that put my hand up and said, yeah, I'd be happy to be involved in doing things like that. So presented as well as doing my day-to-day sales role, would often get involved in those webinars, and that transformed into speaking at user groups. The first community conference that I did was virtual London's Calling back in 2021, when I gave the Git for Admins presentation there as well. And I really enjoyed those parts of the job, and presenting, and being in the community, and getting engaged with the community, and really understanding the landscape and the challenges that people are trying to solve, and really being a connector to the wider community, rather than just serving the customers or prospective customers that came in and talking to them. Which all the bits of my role I enjoyed was actually understanding their problems and advising them on their problems and things like that. What I didn't enjoy about sales was the pressure and stress of carrying a number. One of those things like, you have a revenue target and you're bound by that revenue target, and that was the pressure of my job, and that I didn't really enjoy. So if we bring Kevin back into the picture once more, I turned to Kevin through just over 3 years ago, and said, hey, I really enjoy doing these parts of my role. I love this company, I love what I'm doing, but the stress of carrying a number isn't getting the best out of me. I think it's holding me back from doing my best work and what might be valuable. However, what I do recognize is that there is a need in this community for people to be out there and being able to dedicatedly focus their time on educating the community on some of the best practices that we talk about routinely day to day, and I want to scale that and do that more. Is there an opportunity for me to have a role that basically focuses on that? And he was just like, yeah, I think so. Let me chat to our head of marketing at the time, who was a lady named Alice. Alice turned around to me and she said, absolutely, I want somebody like you. I've been thinking about a role like this for the marketing team for a while. Come and do it. So that's how it started. So a little bit of self-awareness to recognize where I was in my journey and what I wanted to do, but also a bit of trust from the organization to say, Jack knows what he's doing. He wants to do this thing and we have a need for it. Let's make it happen.
Nice. And then you got your, and then now you have your teammate Rob as well to kind of.
I do. I'm very grateful to have Rob. So Rob Cowell, a long-time software Salesforce developer, Salesforce architect. We have a really interesting relationship actually in the way that we talk about the Salesforce ecosystem and the DevOps space that we're in. So I'm, like you mentioned at the start of the podcast, and as I've started to allude to, I'm a lot more focused on the people, culture, and start to do some of the process side of the business and focused on those things. That's very much what I focused on when I was an AE, whereas Rob is typical like developer, typical developer persona, very technical, has got a lot of deep technical knowledge about the Salesforce platform. He himself was a Gearset customer before joining Gearset, so it has a lot of the technical nuance that people need to understand about the implementation of their CI/CD pipelines or their observability practices or their data backup strategy, whatever it might be from that technical standpoint. So we approach evangelism the same, but in terms of like the writing and the presenting and all those nice things that we do, but we just talk about the whole Salesforce experience from the two different angles, which I think complement each other nicely. So Rob focuses very much on the technical side of things. I focus on the people and process side of things. And those two experiences and both of our separate skill sets combine quite nicely to have a two-person team that can really address every challenge that a team is facing when they are looking at their DevOps lifecycle and the changes that they might need to make in their organization to be really, truly well-oiled and successful in software development lifecycle best practices.
No, it makes sense. We have had Rob on the podcast, in fact. So if you're watching the video, there'll be a link somewhere on the screen. There somewhere. And if you're listening to it, you can go back through the episode list, or I'll put a link in the description as well. So you've alluded so let's talk about this kind of focus on the cultural side of things, because one of the things that always sticks in my head is, I had Matt Morris was one of the many people that has drilled this into me, but it's always for some reason in my head kind of stuck with him. Is that whenever you're dealing with anything in technology, there are three problems: it's people, processes, and technology. And DevOps, I think, is no different. It's the technology is quite simple. It's there, whether it is a tool like Gearset or whether it's you roll your own thing using the CLI or whatever. The technology is actually a fairly well understood thing now. There's enough blog posts and tools and things out there for it. The processes take a bit of time to get set up, but again, excuse me, quite well documented, quite well understood, and there's different flavors out there. But I think the people aspect of any change or transformation or kind of implementation is always the hardest part. And you kind of alluded to the fact that your focus is really more on that people side of the kind of a problem. And is that just because of kind of your background and how you've kind of been in what I'm going to call more people-centric roles, or is it because, or is there another reason, or is it just that kind of that's the itch you like to scratch, is dealing with how people sort out those problems?
Both. I think it's definitely the itch I want to scratch, but I think the itch is there because I've seen it and built a career around people. If you look at my experience in recruitment, it wasn't just I specialized in architecture, just the other type of architecture, the building and design architecture. It wasn't just, hey, I need a job, like, can you find me a job at a company? And it wasn't just, hey, we need somebody to fill this role. When I partnered with when I partnered with the architecture practices and companies that I worked with, building contractors, you kind of name it, anybody that had an architecture need in their organization, like I dealt with. When I partnered with them, it wasn't just I need an architect that can draw drawings and do this thing. When I worked with a business, especially on the client side, really made a concerted effort to understand the business and what the owners of these practices were trying to achieve, and if they had growth plans, like what was their growth plan. If they just wanted to maintain their business, like what would slot in nicely to maintain that business, what level of skills do they need from the person coming in to be able to maintain that business, and that level of expertise, like in a healthy kind of manner. And ultimately that does come down to understanding the people, how they gel well together to actually achieve those objectives. So there's been many occasions where we're actually asking those questions. So if you want to translate that to Salesforce speak, where it's actually putting on a good business analysis hat and saying, hey, what are actually your objectives? What kind of skills do you need? They usually come to you with a job spec, and it's got, oh no, this is a cute, I'm not going to go down this tangent, but job specs are, you can just get in the bin as far as I'm concerned, especially if they're job specs that people haven't updated for 10 years, right? And that's very much a common thing. They'll have a list of skills. We want this person to have this technology experience. We want them to have built these types of projects. We want them to have done X, Y, Z. You know, when you get down to it, especially in any business, most of that list doesn't really matter. A lot of it comes down to the human that is going into that position. What kind of soft skills do they have, or what extra elements of their personality or experiences can you actually leverage within that business to maintain the overall objective of the practice? And I saw that multiple times, where a lot of the times me and my clients would just throw the job spec out of the window and say, actually, this person has XYZ experience based on what you've told me. You might need somebody with this kind of experience to take on the extra sales pressure or the extra client engagement piece. You don't need this person to sit there and draw drawings all the time. You've got a team that can do that for you. Why have you got this in the job spec for this senior person that you're hiring? And I think that's when we translate that kind of the human experience and the overall objective of, you know, adopting the DevOps process. Like, a lot of organizations don't turn to any vendor or look at revamping their DevOps practice without a core reason that's beyond, we want to do DevOps, right? They go, we're trying to implement we're going to build a new greenfield org. We're implementing Service Cloud. We are trying to do something that is going to push our business forward. If we are not able to do that unless we make some fundamental change in how we work as a team to do this. And then they go, okay, if we adopt, we've heard great things about DevOps. DevOps is going to change the way we work, and it's going to free up all this extra time. It's going to do this, that, and the other. They will turn to the technology first. Like you said in the conversation that you were having with Matt Morris, you've got people, process, technology. The technology bit's actually probably the easy bit. You can buy Gearset. You can build and roll your own solution. You can use one of the other vendors. God forbid, I'll probably get fired for saying that. But the actual thing that people have, the real issue is you can purchase a tool, but if you're purchasing a tool, then it just becomes a band-aid unless you're addressing the fundamental issues that a lot of people have in their teams. The reason that it's easy for, I believe, it's my personal philosophy, that it's easy for teams to buy a tool or start to implement a tool or technology, because it's the thing that is easy to criticize, it's easy to rip out, it's easy to replace theoretically from an optics standpoint. What it's much harder to do is take a mirror and say, hey, organization, here's our mirror. What are we looking at an organizational process and people level? People don't like doing that, so they don't do it. And they look for technology to be the band-aid for those issues. But when you start to focus on that issues, if you're actually brave enough to look at the mirror when you've got a pimple on your face, you can actually solve the problem of the pimple, right? Rather than just feeling around and what have you. And the same thing goes for people, for the people side of change that needs to happen to actually implement a technology solution. But anyway, like, I've gone a little bit long-winded there, but the overall objectives of somebody buying a DevOps solution or any kind of platform, whether it's, you know, we want to buy like DocuSign or Conga or whatever, that's actually solving a bigger business need. What are the actual issues that are happening that we're looking for this technology to solve? and what changes do we need to make so that when we do implement this technology, that it's going to be successful and we do actually get the better close rate, or we are able to close our customer support requests quicker, or this, that, and the other. That you can't just jump to the technology bit. You've got to go, okay, do we have the right people to do this? What is our people experience right now? What is the process that they follow? And then how is the technology currently supporting that? It goes people, process, product is the way that I talk about it. And if we go back to talking about hierarchies, that is the hierarchy that is going to make you successful if you address things in those issues in that order, rather than just jumping to technology and saying, save us, save us, product provider.
The magic silver bullet tool again, like Salesforce.
Yeah, so if we go back to silver bullets, it's just like Salesforce can do a lot of wonderful things, but it doesn't do a lot of wonderful things unless you have the people that are there and bought into the success of the business and actually making that business successful. This is one of the reasons that I think a lot of if like NGOs and nonprofits had more resources, because they're so mission driven, that they could probably be the most successful businesses in the world, because they all have a mission and everybody that works for that company believes in that mission. That becomes a lot harder to do if you work for a manufacturing company that you don't really have any real affinity to, if it's just a job for you. So yeah, like again, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I will carry on speaking about it. Like, you got to look at the people in the business, and how you improve the experience for the business. And if you turn the people into advocates for your business, I don't know, maybe they will love manufacturing more than anybody else and be a super advocates for your brand, and your brand grows. You never know. So I don't know if I actually answered your question, because I can't remember what your question was.
No, you did. It was the question was originally around kind of why the focus on the people side of things initially, and why that was kind of the itch you were scratching. So I think the the interesting thing kind of that you just made me think about there is, I am long enough in the tooth to remember Agile being kind of rolled out everywhere, which is it was the same sort of thing of, we'll just start doing Agile. That'll make us more productive. It's like, well, how? Because we'll be doing Agile. Yes, but what fundamentally about Agile, what will we do different? Well, we'll be doing it in stories on a board rather than the way we were doing it. Okay, and why will that make us faster? Because it will make us, it's kind of these circular conversations. You've still got the same fundamentally broken kind of pieces of your organization to do things with. It's just now you're doing them with whiteboard and index cards rather than a big spec sheet.
We're doing waterfall in 2 weeks now rather than 3 months now.
Exactly. And so I think the other kind of interesting question I wanted to ask you there was, when you look at organizations who are starting to take on DevOps then, and kind of make that culture shift. We spoke a lot earlier on about feedback and how important that is. And one of the things that I was on a webinar, in fact, for DevOps Launchpad earlier this week, and one of the things I kind of spoke about was, when I got DevOps, let's be frank, it was CI/CD, and it integrated well and was probably a decent DevOps system, but DevOps wasn't a word back then. Integrated into one of the companies I worked at. The first few weeks, everyone hated it. Everyone hated it because, and you and I spoke about this a little bit off air, about that kind of, I'm going to say, transparency that it brings. Like, one of the really good things I think about these processes and kind of these practices is that they bring a lot of transparency into where things break. And that is very, very uncomfortable if you're the person that's broken them. Now, all of us make mistakes. I have broken more builds and more orgs, and if anyone's watched any of mine and Peter's live streams, they will have seen how bad I am at programming. Really, literally woeful at it.
It's a damning indictment.
Buy both of my books on programming and read them. Just do not follow what I do on screen. But it's. But I think it's a really, really interesting thing to think about. How for the first couple of weeks, people, first month or two, in fact, people really hated it because things would break, and then it'd be like, and as Jack and I were chatting about off air, is when I was in an office at this point, something would break, and I'd literally be able to say to someone, John, you've broken the build. Mike, you've broken the build. Laura, you need to go fix this, and kind of everyone would feel that, And it was only after a few weeks where it was one of those things, it was like, we don't need to actually, I didn't spend a lot of time actually shaming people like that. But what I mean, there was a lot of that team mentality where someone's like, oh, someone's just broken the build, because it was a very visible thing we had in chatter back in those days rather than in Slack. And what I wonder is, as people got used to it, everyone actually became really happy with that, because it meant that they could see where things were and they would stop. It would stop things breaking as they went forward. So as I said, like, you're not actually breaking the build, you're breaking your push to the build. The actual build is fine. Like the main branch is protected and okay. This is why we have the review process and we have all these kind of draft runs and things. And kind of that shift in mentality made people really like it, because it meant that they, said, if you break your build 50 times, I don't care, as long as it's fixed when it gets in and it's at a peer review. So if you were thinking about the, little thumbs up because I've not turned off the Apple emotions. If you're thinking about, if someone came to you today and was like, okay, Jack, I do want a silver bullet, but I want your advice as to, in my organization, what is the biggest cultural practice I could implement that will help me succeed with DevOps? What would that be? Would it be that feedback mechanism that we spoke about, or would it be something else, do you think? Sorry, big question, I know. So, like, Jack, how do you solve all my problems with one simple answer? Like, but yeah, what would be your foundational item, you would say?
I think they work in tandem together. The big thing that we've been talking about primarily in this episode is feedback, and that is fundamentally important. I think the other thing that complements feedback and is essential to how feedback is received and then processed is communication. And you can no, let's not muddy the water. So feedback and communication. So if you look at somebody coming at you with a silver bullet, right? If you say to somebody, I want to buy Gearset, or we bought Gearset is going to solve all our problems, right? The philosophy, if you're approached, the philosophy for adopting a tool like Gearset and following the DevOps lifecycle and the best practices, we take the 6 stages of the DevOps lifecycle, and they are plan, build, validate, release, operate, and observe. For each of those sections of the lifecycle, you're not going to, and I cannot reiterate this enough, like DevOps at the core of everything is about continual iterative improvement. So the silver bullet analogy is one of those that kind of doesn't mesh nicely with DevOps anyway, because if you're adopting these processes, it is about that continual iterative improvement. And if you think about that, then the feedback loop is actually going to be the thing that is going to impact you the most. And then how that feedback is communicated back to the business or the people relevant for solving the issues or taking the next step is fundamentally important. So you might say, we bought Gearset, we've set it all up from a technical perspective, like the best, like no issues with how the system works, operates, whatever. The thing is okay, so we're getting this feedback from the system that there's an issue here. We're getting feedback from this part of the process that in our validations that some tests are failing. It's okay, how do we then take that feedback, communicate it to either the person that has caused the thing to break or the team in general? We have these issues, like what do you think? How you communicate about how you communicate feedback is almost as important as the feedback itself, because we talked earlier about people who get the feedback and are just like, oh, I don't like that feedback, and like setting those clear expectations. When you communicate, especially in a leadership position, I was asked this at a conference. A conference in Texas a few weeks back. I was asked, like, how many opinions shall we get, or like how many people like should we have this involved? And I said, well, there's that classic analogy: too many cooks spoils the broth. You need to have SME experience and input for each part of the thing that you're looking at. You need to collate that, and then ultimately the buck does stop with somebody. That might be a team lead, it might be a release manager. That person then has to make a decision based on all of the feedback that you've received. what you do next. That is the imperative point at which communication is going to be how well you can communicate is going to be your strongest asset, because then you have to go, we are going to do X, Y, or Z next. This is the situation. We're going to do X, Y, and Z next. This is why we have these other issues. This is why they have been deprioritized. And if you nail that communication and take into account all of the feedback and communicate that back well to the business, people are bought in. People need to feel heard. They need to feel listened to. They need to feel seen. And this is where change management kind of comes into it. So implementing anything ultimately comes down to how well you can handle change management, and that comes down to feedback and communication once more. But if you can effectively communicate this back and understand, not shy away from any issues, but be able to prioritize ruthlessly what is going to have the most impact for us, what's low-hanging fruit that we can just knock out, what's going to take a more concerted effort but is going to provide a lot of value. This is why we're doing those things. This is why we're taking the approach that we're taking, and get everybody bought in. That communication isn't, you make sure that you acknowledge that you've heard the feedback, but you've also validated the decision. And like I said to this person at this conference, the buck is going to stop. This person was in that kind of team lead position where the buck did stop with them. Ultimately, the buck stops with you, and you're going to have to make a decision. Not everybody. Also, you kind of got to abstract the personal out of it again from that thing, which almost sounds counterintuitive. If you abstract not everybody is going to like this decision. However, how you communicate it will be imperative to whether the person likes it, doesn't like it and still carries on with it, or doesn't like it and is kind of resistance or a blocker to you moving forward. So feedback and communication is the thing that every team should be working on continuously in a DevOps mindset, whether they're buying a DevOps tool, whether it comes to getting all of their Apex out of Apex and into Flow, or whatever kind of transformation or project they're trying to do, communicating why it is, and then being able to get them bought in. The other thing that I find really helpful with my background, and what I think everybody should do, and what I would actually advocate anybody coming straight out of college or university, whatever it is go and do a sales job first, because foundational selling skills help you communicate. They help you understand what people find important, and they allow you to translate that back to it. So if you do have somebody that is going to be a blocker, and they're going to they might well perceive issues, you say, we're going to do this. I know that you like to spend time doing this, or you've spoken to me about you would like to have more of X, Y, Z. If we do this, and by doing this, we are going to free up time, or we're going to enable you to focus on the things of your job that you like doing, and being able to sell what you're proposing back in ways that they understand and are going to benefit them, then you're going to be more successful. And sales is one of the key skills, and being in a sales role gives you that kind of experience and allows you to make those connections and be able to translate value in that way in each person. So anybody that's a team lead, make sure that you understand and you know their team, you know their motivations, and that becomes so much easier to communicate what you're doing and the choices that you've made, if you can make it relatable to what interests them, because not everybody on the same team has the same interests. They may overlap in some places, but at the end of the day, we're all humans with our own interests. For me, if somebody's saying, Jack, if we do this, it's actually going to free up more of your time to focus on doing more podcasts in the role, the things that you enjoy doing. We're going to be able to send you to more events if we do this thing that I know that you're not particularly keen on, but it will do this. Hell, it'll allow you to finish work early and go and play 9 holes more frequently. That's great for me. If you understand those things about your team and are able to communicate back in their terms how it's going to benefit them, then you'll be infinitely more successful. So feedback and communication are kind of go hand in hand together. It's all well and good giving feedback, but if you can't do it in the right way, then it's going to fall flat or be ignored.
No, that's a really good. That's a really comprehensive and good answer. So thank you for that, and kind of really hits on a bunch of those things. So I suppose the follow-up I have for that then is just to talk about how you see some of that being impacted now by kind of the changing nature of work. So as I mentioned, when I first started doing kind of DevOps processes and practices, everyone was in an office 5 days a week. You were all sat around. the very first place I did it, we even had desktop computers we were all using. No one had a laptop yet. It's
wow.
I know, yeah, properly old.
What was that like?
I don't, like, seriously, it was a while ago. There was actually, I've worked in more than one place as a developer where we've had a physical server somewhere that had everything on it, and it scares the absolute hell out of me now that all the data was sat there somewhere and it was just backed up onto some tape. We had a backup, but if there'd have been like a catastrophic fire or explosion, like still would have gone somewhere.
Your floppy disk burnt.
There was one place like had actual magnetic tapes.
That's crazy.
And when I say one place, it wasn't that long ago. Like, it was still within. I mean, still 20 odd years ago, but not as long ago as I would like to pretend. But the thing I wanted to ask you, so with the changing nature of work, as I mentioned, a lot more teams now are either hybrid or fully remote. There's obviously the new kind of team member, which might be your AI agent or AI in general. And there's two kind of sides to that. One is people using AI to help them draft code and work in a browser, which I think is really just a human's code, but slightly assisted with like a tool. And then there's also the kind of concept of an AI actually developing. How do you think that that's going to change the nature of how people implement and feel about DevOps, because of the fact that giving feedback? I mean, giving feedback to an AI agent is much easier because you can just change the command prompts and tell it, but it still has to be an active member. But I suppose more interesting perhaps for me is that remote piece, because having worked and led remote teams where we are developing things, there is that communication is key, as you've mentioned. That kind of feedback is key. But I think we can all agree that me sending you a message on Slack saying, "Hey Jack, you've broken," or "Hey Jack, can you update this please to include this?" and me being on the phone with you and being face to face saying, "Hey Jack, could you just update that little thing for me?" Exactly the same message. I could use the same wording, but in text you don't get tone and intonation and body language and all those things. So how do you think that these kind of changes in both the way we work and the nature of work and how we're structured impact kind of how DevOps is done now?
Another big question, Paul. Geez.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, I'm not expecting you to have the definitive answer. Just I'm more interested in what your view is on. Have you seen it have an impact, or do you think that it's one of those things that over by the time sort of the other tools there support it to allow it to occur with less friction?
Yeah, I think the way it's really interesting. This kind of era that we're in, and the reason that I think this conversation is more important than ever, and focusing on the people side of things is more important than ever, is because regardless of AI applications or what have you, if we come back to what we said before, like there's a human at the other end of everything that we do, the system, the communication, the way it's been received. I did a talk at TDX in London last week, which was called Communicate Confidently with Slack. And that was about digital body language and how we show up in text-based conversations. Like Slack is the vehicle that we use, and obviously a Salesforce product. The same would go for emails, and the importance of things like emojis and having a deeper contextual awareness of who we're communicating with on the other side of the message. Like if you message me and say, "Hey Jack, this needs fixed," like you and I have a relationship where we know each other well enough to know that you're not chewing me out and you're just saying this thing needs fixed, right? We lose a lot of that, especially in a remote first environment. And understanding, we have to have, as a human, we actually have to have a lot more appreciation. As there was a DEI talk about at London's Calling, and Sarah Metcalf said, treat others the way that you want to be treated is like a broken mantra. Like, treat others in the way that they want to be treated is more important than ever now. And I think that applies to digital communication too. If you're communicating with somebody in Gen Z, for example, that likes to use emojis back with them, mirror how they like to be talked to, so they don't lose in translation the meaning and intent of what you meant, because that's the way that they understand things. They use emojis to communicate, and all of these things. This is the dangerous thing, I think, about AI. There was a study recently that was published, I think it was just a couple of days ago, where MIT had done a study on AI usage and people that had used ChatGPT to help them write things from the off, or versus people that hadn't used any artificial intelligence and used it later. And they noticed significant drop-off levels between the people that used ChatGPT and those that hadn't, in their cognition, in the ability to remember how they'd written things or what they'd actually produced. And I think that's really, really dangerous in terms of where we are now, when communication is at the forefront of everything that we do. Another great example of this and how it will start to impact people is, I was listening to another podcast a couple of days ago where it was Simon Sinek, actually. If anybody's familiar with Simon Sinek, he was on Stephen Bartlett's podcast, Diary of a CEO. And he said, if you're in an argument with your spouse or your partner, and they brought a point up and you went away to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT for advice and the answer, and you come back and it gives you the most perfect resolution to the answer, the issue that you're having, you go back to your spouse or partner and say, the answer to ChatGPT given you, the next question that they're going to ask is, did you use ChatGPT to help you? It doesn't matter that your answer was perfect. The fact that you used ChatGPT and you hadn't worked through that yourself to get to the answer, you hadn't worked through the problem with your own cognition and your own thoughts and your own feelings, that's actually the issue there. What you said was perfect, but that's irrelevant because you use this system to help you. And I think we need to be really mindful about where we do and don't use AI for those tasks. Like, I don't use AI for my writing, apart from to check it for clarity and punctuation and things like that. So I will put stuff into AI after the fact, but there's a lot of pride that I still maintain in my ability to write things. So I don't use it. And also to see the study from MIT coming out saying it's really affecting like cognition. You look at like entry-level software roles that could be done by a quote unquote senior developer with the assist of an AI agent. You know, juniors reviewing work that juniors might have done. Like, how is a junior going to cut their teeth? How are they going to understand code in the future? And that's the really dangerous precipice that we're on now if we're not super intentional about our human interactions and our communications. So like, I'm an advocate for using AI and using it in places that it's going to help you, but not at the detriment of the human experience, which ultimately that's what's going to be left. You know, you could get super dystopian and say it's going to be us versus machines, or super intelligence is going to take over at some point, and what's going to happen then? Like, our masses of us going to be out of work? Will we all have to have some kind of universal income to sustain us? You know, these are all scenarios in the next 30 to 50 years that could happen. However, if we make a conscious effort now to be mindful of our AI usage and where it does and doesn't help us, especially, and keep humans at the forefront of these kind of conversations, we can be mindful of where we should be maintaining our cognition and how our experiences will change. So I hope that gives you some perspective. And I think this is universal. It doesn't just apply to DevOps and where AI can be useful in development processes or practices. But ultimately, it comes back down to humans. And ultimately, I would dare say I would prefer to talk to a human that doesn't use AI for everything, because they probably have they're more attuned to thoughts, feelings, and emotions than those that don't. And this MIT study proved that. So yeah, really interesting kind of inflection point of where we are. But I think if we lose touch of what and who we are, then that's going to be quite dangerous. The good thing is that if you do use, I do see a world where if we're using AI properly and effectively, that does free up time and space for us to break down some of the human problems, like silos in organizations. You know, you can't use an AI to help you break down a silo in an organization. You just can't do that. That's a human problem. So free up that human's time to go and solve that problem. So those are the kind of things and ways that I think we should be applying ourselves while maintaining a good level of cognitive engagement in our workplace interactions.
Oh no, definitely. I think the other interesting one, I don't know if you saw the Apple study as well, about how good LLMs are at actually thinking. And I think that there's, I use AI in my day-to-day life, you know, on and off. I can't say that I've got it turned on all the time. I use it for templating stuff, which is quite good. It was a job I had where I had to effectively write 150 lines of template CSS and SLDS code. Did not need to sit there doing that myself. That is a job where a robot can be very, very helpful and helping explain things. But I think one of the interesting things I think to kind of tie it to the DevOps process is I think one of the things that we will see is DevOps acting as a useful regulator is the word I'm going to use on kind of AI driven development. And what I mean by that is when you go on Twitter and you see people saying about the look at the vibe coded app I've built that I've kind of stuck up somewhere. It's like, well, great. But having the correct DevOps process that goes through in a real organization that's doing it will mean that it goes through those checks and balances. Like, well, have you got your API key stored in there? Because we can check for that using an analyzer. Are you following best practices? Are you using, are you naming things correctly? Are you using the correct version of things? All of these things that I think can empower more people to do more stuff, but have those kind of checks and balances in place so that you're not just kind of allowing anyone to whack any old rubbish in and stick it up somewhere. And I think for organizations, that's, for me, one of the key things that people need to kind of be thinking about is, okay, I don't want to put the brakes on, enabling people to use AI or use those tools. What I want to do is I want to help them use it in a productive and controlled manner where my risk exposure is low. I was actually on the messaging a bank yesterday about an account issue I had. And I spoke to the bot, and the bot gave me an answer. And I spoke to a human, and the human said, "Oh no, the bot's giving you the wrong answer. That's not correct." And I was like, "Well, the bot's given me actual financial kind of information there. It's checked some transactions and given me a response. That's not good that your bot's doing that." And I think that's where you kind of got. I think DevOps, taking it to the development side of the world, I think DevOps is really, really powerful. Is it's going to be saying, well, great, now that you've got people adding in code that might not necessarily be historically developers, or you've got developers doing things at a more rapid pace, it adds in that kind of, for one of a phrase, break or check or balance that just says, hey, let's just make sure this follows the right patterns and processes before we go sticking it in there.
Yeah, I think tailoring whatever AI you are using to the application and that deep level of understanding that it needs to perform those checks and balances properly is kind of imperative to the success going forward. So, there's a lot of talk these days about like the Einstein trust layer, for example, or like trust generally in these AI applications. And I think I'm reassuringly, I don't think we're quite there yet, as your bank story kind of confirms.
Yes.
Like where we are right now, these things will become infinitely more helpful as time goes on, providing that we are again, I'm going to come back to, they are there to serve us, not the other way around.
Yes, no, definitely. Well, we could end up doing like a Terminator movie review here, so we won't. But so we've covered a lot of stuff today around kind of just a lot of stuff. A lot of big questions as we kind of have alluded to around kind of what the future of DevOps might look like and how that interacts with things, about the important processes, about feedback, and getting constructive feedback and criticism in the right ways and building that good culture. And so kind of what I just want to wrap up with is two things. So first of all, the question I've got is, well, what's kind of next for you? We've gone through your story here of, how you've, all the way from kind of your end of high school, sixth form, and all the way through your career, and how you made it into the Salesforce space and have, kind of cemented your role and your niche in there. So what's next for you? I mean, you mentioned that you have a great joy in writing. Are we going to see a book from Jack that's going to be like DevOps for the people, or what's next for you on the roadmap?
I don't think a book is completely off the cards. Maybe. Join my colleague Rob in the Authors Club, potentially, for sure. I think for me the immediate need is, now that a lot of the Salesforce ecosystem is becoming more au fait with DevOps, is continue to educate them on the DevOps lifecycle and everything that's wrapped around it, not from just a technical perspective, and continue to educate people on the people first ways that they can change and transform their businesses. I think there's still many years worth of conversations in the trenches, so to speak, to really push that mindset forward. So carrying on in earnest what I'm doing now, hopefully having more great conversations like this to kind of spread that message and spread that ethos. A book maybe, and carrying on maintaining the passion projects that I have. Those are some really core things that help keep me motivated and carry on learning and just soaking up a lot more of what this community has to offer, and hopefully presenting on more and bigger stages across the ecosystem too. So I don't know, but in personal ambitions, it's always, I've only spoken at Dreamforce once. Like, I'd like to do that again, like on bigger stages around this kind of stuff, and hopefully more and more people start to realize the value of the human first approach in the AI era, and really champion that. There's some other things in the works that I've got going on with my partner Stephanie Herrera, which listeners to this podcast may be familiar with too, that we're working on. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting couple of years.
Cool. No, that sounds good. Yes, we had Stephanie on the podcast. I think just after Christmas, maybe. It's hard to keep track of time because I can't believe it's sort of end of June already. But yeah, so definitely go and listen to Stephanie's episode as well. Again, I'll put a link on the screen now for those who haven't seen it. So the last question I've got then, which is what I ask everyone that comes on, is what piece of advice or tip you would have to round this episode off for the listener that they can apply today. So it could be, we have people who have got deep technical expertise who sometimes have a technology piece of advice. It could be something you found has worked for you, something that could be, just a general tip or kind of trick that you found has helped you in your career, but something that people can take away today and go and action. So if you could give, if I'm listening to this episode, I've gone all the way through it and thought that was really, really helpful, and you had one tip to give me, what would that tip or bit of advice be, Jack?
One thing that I encourage everybody to do right now today, it's a Friday right now, which is a great day to do this kind of thing anyway. But to tie it back to that feedback thing, go and compliment one of your colleagues on a bit of work that you've seen them do recently, whether it be this week or over the last month. Go and praise them and appreciate them for all the effort that they put in, and tip your metaphorical cap to them for that thing. And make a routine of doing it. If you don't already do it, or if you do already do it, then carry on doing it, and get into that mindset of feedback and praise for each other, and see how it impacts not only you but the person that you're giving it to.
That's a great bit of advice. And for those of us that work on our own and for ourselves, give yourselves a metaphorical pat on the back as well. You've done great this week. This will be coming out on a Thursday, so treat yourself on the Friday to a big pat on the back. So thank you so much, Jack, for being here and for having this conversation with us. We know each other outside of this podcast, but it's been great to catch up and learn more about you. I've really enjoyed it. I hope it was fun for you, and it also was not a grilling. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Really enjoyed it, and hope everybody that's listened has enjoyed it too.
Super. Well, thank you so much again for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe so you can stay up to date with our podcast every couple of weeks. If you've enjoyed it, remember to leave a like or to review it on your podcast player of choice, because it helps spread the word and get it out there. And once again, thank you to Jack for being here, and I'll see you all on the next episode. Thanks, everyone, and goodbye.